A fun chat, I hope. I'm sure.
Guys, we have a legend of RevOps here with us today. So, Jeremy is a RevOps advisor at Insight Partners. We can go more in detail who is Insight Partners, even though we had another episode with Pablo from Insight Partners. Today we will go into nitty gritty of RevOps, into things like revenue operations, forecasting, and how the market changed. But before we jump in, just want to say a few words about Jeremy. Um, of course, it would take me a bunch of time to just read all the experience that Jeremy had, but he spent 16 years, almost 16 years and a half at Gartner, different positions, then also at CB Insights and other companies like SalesLoft, for example, also 3 years in president of senior vice president of revenue and strategy, then professor. Even today, you are professor, right, Jeremy, at NYU school?
Yeah, I'm doing a class periodically at NYU, and I'm starting up a new class I'm teaching at University of Chicago in the fall. So it's fun to teach and give back a little bit in that way.
So the topic that I almost failed when I did my MBA, the statistical measurements, which is quite fun, very interesting views when it comes to forecasting, I suppose, in all these
It does help a
statistical
lot.
measurement.
I'll also say, by the way, when I was an undergrad, I was super intimidated by statistics. I was okay with probability, and you'd think these are shades of gray, but I was super intimidated. So I think so many of the things that you become great at, or hopefully great at in life, are the ones that you failed at early on. So yeah, that's a good example for me of where I'm a super stats nerd now, but was not early on.
I am still intimidated by that. But Jeremy, just to get into it, tell us a bit about Insight Partners, just for the audience, so we understand what you guys do and what you actually advise, and
Yeah.
then we can go directly into today's topic.
Yeah, I'll be brief, and I think I'll make it contextual for the topic today. So we're, I think, about $80 billion of assets under management, a little over 500 portfolio companies. And I personally advise on revenue strategy for somewhere around 100 or 120 of those companies. But the real key for me is, since I'm so data driven, I've got access to write all the reporting data on a quarterly basis for all of these portfolio companies. And I spend a ton of time slicing and dicing through that information to find out what's going on. And then the main job, though, is not the data analysis. The main job is just talking, right, to portfolio companies and understanding where they have opportunities and challenges. And some of those things are quite cyclical. The big one, obviously, that is of interest for our conversation today is the whole world moved from growth at all costs to efficient growth. And we can talk about what that means, but that certainly has changed the tenor of the way that we advise our portfolio companies, but also the tenor of the way that CEOs and CFOs and CROs and CMOs are all thinking about how they structure their teams and run their businesses.
Yeah, and these companies are very known SaaS companies. You can check it out on insightpartners.com/portfolio.
Yeah,
um,
it's actually a good point. Sorry, which is it's all, well, I shouldn't say all. It's 95+% B2B SaaS, so
yeah,
really concentrated in that area.
I mean, we are talking also some public companies, right? Like Shopify, for example, it's public company. But yeah, you guys can do your research for sure. You know, Insight Partners. But I want to go into today's topic, and that's that's more about forecasting after being in a growth at all cost era, like the golden era, let's call it, in this episode. So from the golden era to today's challenges in the whole economical uncertainty. Um, and just for a context, like I was listening to last week earning calls of Salesforce, which dropped like 20%, and also UiPath and some other SaaS company, also Shopify. And they were mentioning something, and I want to dissect this, like how did we get here? They were mentioning about measured buying behavior. So what they were trying to explain is that, hey guys, our long-term deals have a slowdown because there is more, and this is what I understood, there are more stakeholders involved in the buying decision, and especially the CFO is more present in buying this long-term type of software for us. So we have a slowdown in that. There is no, the growth is not what we predicted, right? So what does this measured buying behavior mean? What does it mean, and what we can learn
Yeah.
this type of slowdown, and what's happening today when it comes to forecasting?
Yeah. So so just so folks know, I can't comment on specific companies, but definitely the trend is something that I can comment on. I, I I would say that there's a few trends that have been around just for a while, and it's not that they're new. And then there are some kind of additional trends that have or headwinds, I guess you'd call them, that are layered on top of that. So the increasing number on the buying committee, I think, is not new, right? I mean, I can say
Mm.
definitively, not just I think, right? The people from um, Challenger, right, wrote about this ages ago, and that they got CEB,
They
right,
have
got
also
bought.
this book, Jolt Effect,
Yeah,
that
Jolt
they
Effect
talk
is
a lot.
great. I love
Yeah,
that
yeah,
book.
yeah, about the uncertainty in the market, right?
Yeah, well, Jolt to me, sidebar, right? Like Jolt's one of my favorite sales books, especially one of my favorite recent sales books, and I love it for a particular reason. Was that my takeaway from that one is that you spend the beginning of the sales cycle mostly focused on value creation, and then you spend the back half of the sales cycle mostly focused on risk. You should. Reps are not doing it, but reps should be mostly focused on risk reduction. So, as it pertains
Mm.
to ABM also, which is a big focus obviously for you and your listeners, like that's a big consideration is how do you find mechanisms to reduce the perception of risk on the deal. But we can may or may not come back to that topic, but I want to stay focused on your particular question. But so that first trend of like more people on the buying committee, I think has been around for a while. I also think the CFO thing, I mean, it's certainly been around for the last 5 to 10 years. I don't think it's new. I think it's more intense that I do see there's a lot more budget concentration with the CFO. So whereas there might have been a distributed budget, to the other C-level folks, there's a lot of circumstances now where um, like yeah, these other C-level folks have a sort of implied budget, but the final signature needs to come from the CFO, even if the CFO is not necessarily involved in the deal. And they often don't want to be involved directly, but they do want the whatever the CRO, the CPO, the CMO, the CHRO, whoever, to really come to them with a much more rigorous business case and some measures of accountability. So again, I think that trend has been there for a while. So these things are sort of constantly increasing in intensity, but I think I forget what the exact phrase was, but measured buying behavior.
Yeah.
I think that's a new thing, which is especially in, a lot of SaaS companies sell to other SaaS companies. So especially in like the SaaS world, we've moved, as I mentioned, from growth at all costs to efficient growth. But what does that mean, right? It means previously if everybody was kind of operating and buying the same way, when you added sales capacity, you had a pretty good model to say, like, if I add more sales capacity, I'm going to sell more stuff. And we
Mm.
weren't really so much demand limited in the edge, in the extreme. And right now, because people are minding their and a measure of efficiency is whatever EBITDA margin or free cash flow margin or CAC payback, like pick your efficiency metric. Now that people are not just the CFOs, um, but even more, the CFOs are paying even more attention to it. But I think even the other C level, the rest of the C-suite is all hyper focused on these efficiency metrics. Like they're just not going to spend as aggressively. And when they want to pull back and improve EBITDA margin or free cash flow margin, the first thing you do is you cut non-people expenses,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the non-people stuff is programs, it's consulting, it's software, right? All these non-people things. And so like I think that's the measured buying. And then the next piece, by the way, which is the compounding effect, is you at some point, you've squeezed the non-people stuff as much as you can, and then you start to trim the people.
Yeah, yeah.
So here's this like negative spiral, which is now that you started to trim people, okay, hey, I just committed, and maybe I did a multi-year deal, right? So I committed to whatever 5,000 licenses for my organization, but now I'm slowing hiring. In fact, I might be downsizing, and so now I don't need 5,000 licenses. And if I'm on year to year, then I can true that up at the end of the, fix that at the end of the year. Um, so yeah, companies have to figure out ways. How do I preserve my ARR in the face of, right, potentially
Mm-hmm.
lower seat opportunities. So right, these things tend to compound upon each other. But yeah, my net there is like the the perfect storm of a series of existing trends with this efficiency mindset layered on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
What I
And
don't,
if we,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was just thinking about like forecasting and how does this change forecasting, right? And I will try to organize my thoughts. So I think there are two school of thoughts. One is like tactician type of forecasting, so bottom up, right? Like, or hey, the business cops, or you guys as I don't know how much like the venture capital is involved in the forecasting, but the top down approach, right? That's one thing, like which one we take, and then which is the how do we look at the efficiency, like do we look at the CAC payback, EBITDA, uh, what's your thought on that? Because I would like to clarify this, and then go into how do we reforecast, or how do we look at forecasting when we are in such uncertain markets, and what do we do with that, and what's the relation with the fund, and how do we explain that we need to reforecast, right?
Yeah, I still think there's still a sizable separation between revenue forecasting or ARR forecasting and efficiency. Um, but they're getting more and more tied together. So for instance, I don't see RevOps people currently forecasting um, profitability, right? They're still forecasting revenue. They're thinking about profitability. The CFO obviously is building more sophisticated, or the FP&A function, financial planning function, is building more sophisticated um, P&L models to understand the nature of the business. But yeah, on the forecasting side, it's I mean I've had multiple times. The reason it's hard to like read my bio is because I'm old, right? So the older you get, the more you've done. But I've been through multiple cycles, and indeed, like when you build forecasts, you're using the trend, right? Like there's a trend in seasonality for forecasts, and macroeconomic conditions are a factor there too. And so you build a model, and let's say your model is based on you know the last 12 months, so that you
Mm,
can look, or even more, but you can look at trend and seasonality, and um, then all of a sudden something changes and it's wrong, right? Like you're
Mm,
too high or too low. In this case, this forecasts are too high. So, um, the 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 COVID was super interesting in this respect. Like when COVID first hit, everybody had to revise their forecast models down for the first whatever it was 6 months, and then lo and behold, there was so much economic stimulus that you had to revise your models up again. So yeah, when this happens, I think the first thing to do is to shorten the look back horizon. And right at the transition point, there's very little that you can do, and there is no crystal ball for what's going to happen. A lot of people in that first 6 months of COVID laid off 10, 15, 20% of their workforce because they thought this is going to be right, like this is going to trigger an immediate economic recession. And it did in some sectors, but in hospitality, obviously, for example, but in other sectors, right, those really turbocharged. So yeah, that's the first piece. And then I think the second piece is like the trend and seasonality thing is not enough. So you're triangulating here. You've also got how much sales capacity you have, but the thing I think to add in as well is the demand piece, and that's the part that's really critical right now.
mm-hmm,
Is I was at dinner last night with a bunch of CROs and heads of RevOps, and this topic came up, and the I think the general sentiment right now is, so someone said, hey, we're going to hire whatever. They were a smaller company and they were looking for advice, and they said we want to hire 5 AEs, and another CRO at the table turned to them and said, what evidence do you have that you're going to actually be able to provide those AEs with a sufficient number of leads?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And outbound
Correct.
prospecting, like cold outbound prospecting, where you have no first or third party intent, you just have a target customer list. If you're under about $50,000 of AR of a AS, ACV, annual contract
Mm-hmm.
value, outbound is probably not going to work for you. Like,
Yeah.
so, and in this case, like the person, it was very speculative, right? They didn't have sufficient demand. So the advice back to that person was like, you're under 50K, so pure outbound's probably not going to work for you. You probably shouldn't hire 5 AEs right now because you don't have enough inbound demand. True inbound, like hand raisers requesting demos, that's true inbound. You don't have enough partner generated, and those to me would be like the two big inbound sources in that circumstance, right? Is or whatever lead sources is partner generated and marketing slash inbound, true inbound. So in the absence of that, they really shouldn't be hired. Like in the old days of growth at all costs, you know what? If they didn't hit their 4x or 5x quota to OTE, like it was okay
Yeah.
because you were getting valued on a multiple of revenue. But now you can't do that. So I think this person realized last night that they should not hire 5 AEs. They should take that money and instead use it to build out their inbound channel, to build out their partner channel.
Yeah, and I think the challenge here is that our GTMs are, you know, 2020 and 2019, not 2024, right? And besides the low ACV, I think it's also the whole technology. Like like you work sales loft, right? Like, and you see the Google changes with the whole security, gators
Mhm.
that they developed, right? So like the deliverability and the spam now, it's really hard to scale outbound with what we were doing, you know, COVID and pre-COVID times. So I suppose not only that you hire five AEs, one, you cannot give them leads, two, they will start prospecting, but they will not reach those actual potential buyers. And not because the maybe the copy is bad or they are not good AEs, just because the technology also changed, right? Like you have this security um, done by Outlook and
Yeah, yeah.
Google. So definitely, and this is what I'm always preaching, like thought leadership, subject matter expertise, builds that build that you know
Build the brand.
niche
Yeah.
and content and brand, right? Before you go out, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I do think at this point I agree. It's very much um it's not anymore that you can just hire a bunch of people and throw them at accounts and, hope for the best. It just it I think this is also not like the security thing, right? There's been spam filters forever. I don't know that there's always been email deliverabilities and domain reputation, right,
Yeah.
issues for forever. But um, I, so the trend is just intensified also by multiple other things. So yes, one is a technology that the spam filters are getting better and smarter as they have over time. I think the second thing is we as a uh, the collective, I suppose, right, continue to invent and utilize new ways that are supposedly more efficient, but are highly ineffective and just make things worse. So what I mean by that, right now, there's all these AI SDR
Mm-hmm.
tools that are popping up,
Yeah.
and to me, by the way, I don't call them AI SDR tools. I actually think they're the next generation of marketing automation. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think, right, like they're not, it's not an SDR tool because, um, well, first of all, it's email only typically.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if it's going to be a true SDR
You
tool,
need to
it needs
call.
to be multi-channel.
Yeah.
And I have seen some companies working towards, and obviously like what ChatGPT did with 4.0, um, with like voice enabled stuff. Like there are people who are working at that, but I don't, I really doubt like if an AI were to call me, you can still detect it's an AI. There's that delay that still exists, and maybe I don't know, 6 months, a year from now, probably not too long, we'll cross the uncanny valley where I have a hard time maybe distinguishing between a human and a non-human, like AI talking to me. That will be an interesting time. But like before then, it's not. And I saw a study recently where somebody used one of these AI SDR tools. They sent in a very short span of time, like an ungodly amount of emails, easily 5,000. It could have been 10,000, and booked zero meetings, zero.
Mm.
And I'm not surprised, right? Like a lot of that got trapped by spam filters. So that's kind of one trend. But I think the other trend is, it used to be that there were one or two companies in a given segment, and now there's 10 or 20 who are all
Mm.
competing with, they like to call out their differentiation, but they pretty much have the same core product,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all emailing you simultaneously. You just tune it out. You just tune it out. So I think buyers are fatigued as well.
So in this situation, what's what's your advice in forecasting? Like what do we do? Like, okay, these things don't work, lot of
Yeah,
competition, market changed. We have a GTM from 2019 or 2020. We maybe we did a mistake in last year when we planned for the and we when we did the forecasting. We realized we don't need to hire five A's. So
yeah, yeah,
what
yeah.
now?
I think there's two, like for me, forecasting, there's at least two pieces. One is the actual, hey, I'm going to call a number. And for
Mm,
me, the calling the number, like what is a definition of a good forecast? For me, that is to call a number within plus or minus 5% as of day 15 of the quarter. I'm very specific about it. Like people will say, hey, we came in within 2% or 7% or this, but then I ask them, well, when was that? Was that like the day before? Or was that 10 days before? Was that whatever? So for me, it's 2 weeks in, day 15. And the reason it's 2 weeks in is especially in B2B sales, you got a bunch of opportunities that you were trying to close the prior quarter. Some closed, some didn't. And then some became hopeless, I suppose. So
Mm-hmm.
a good, healthy B2B organizations, right, have great processes. And this is kind of piece one of it, which is, they go through and they have an internal quarterly business review, internal QBR, where they, are go through all of the opportunities and clean them up, get rid of the stuff that is truly closed lost, adjust things in and out of the current quarter and so forth. So once you're at day 15, that should be done. The QBR should be done, and you should be able to call a pretty good forecast. The way to do
And
that, yeah,
on that, because I'm just getting a bunch of questions also from our customers, and about a very simple thing. And I because you talked about cleaning up deals, and I think this is really important to do it well. So, and this is super basic. One is bunch of companies go with deal probability, and I tell
hmm
them, guys, it's not enough because you cannot. It's just your past experience. Now market changes. You cannot go on deal probability. At least that much I know about statistics. And if we go into, let's say, HubSpot, we have the forecast category, right? Like, which is, you look at, you give some qualitative feedback from the
hmm
sales rep, right? Like, from the conversation, what's your take on closing this deal? Not that it's in this stage, right? So, um, my question to you, in this situation today, do we still look at the probability? Do
I
we only look at the category? What do we do in this cleaning section? And when we set up the pipelines, like, what
yeah,
should we
yeah.
even change there?
Well, in order to forecast, you need a probability, right? Because you're weighting
Yeah.
the forecast no matter what. The question then is what goes into the probability, and in it many people, I would say almost the majority, the worst thing that you probably could do, although it's better than nothing, I suppose, like some people don't even stage wait, but like let's
Mm,
say, sorry, don't even wait. So the the
yeah.
the the basic weighting is you just basically say I've got 5 stages or 5 forecast categories, and for each one of those, I'm going to assign a probability of whatever,
Yeah.
10, 30, 50, 80%, whatever. I mean, they're just sort of finger in the air trying to figure something out. You're not going to get to plus or minus 5% as of day 15 if you do it that way. Or you should say you're very, very, very unlikely.
Yeah.
So what I've historically done is the following: um, is for if I'm forecasting SMB and lower mid market, I stage weight based on some historical probability of conversion
Mm-hmm.
of those leads. If I'm forecasting upper mid-market or enterprise, I forecast category weight, right? The usual sort
Okay.
of best case
Best case and so
pipeline
on.
commit. So again, using the last whatever 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and given higher uncertainty, I'm going to shorten that window, right? I'm not going to look back 12 months. Maybe I'm going to look back 6 months. Maybe I'm going to look back 3 months, right? I'm going to make a much shorter look back window during that period of uncertainty, and then I'm also going to eyeball it, and I might, like, normally I would not make a human adjustment to that, but if you feel like you're at a transition point, you're going to need to make an additional adjustment manually, which is
Mm-hmm.
not, like, less than ideal, but you're doing your best to tune the probability based on the trend during a non transition time. That during those times, I think you're fine using whatever 3, 6, 9, 12 month look back on stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm still using that. And then there's a plug, by the way, like the other magical thing in order to get to plus or minus 5% as of day 15 is that even enterprise businesses, but all businesses basically have, some people call it create and close, or a run rate business, which is, I don't, I'm in the quarter, and I'm going to have a certain amount of business that's going to close in less than, the remaining time of the quarter. So I need to estimate that, and
Mm-hmm.
and that plug is, there are lots and lots of different ways to model that plug, but that plug is really important. And I say it exists even in enterprise because although you may not sign you're unlikely to sign a new logo in enterprise in under 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
You're very likely to sign upgrades in
Mm-hmm.
under 90 days, right? Someone just, whatever, they hired a bunch of
So
people, or they're consuming more. Yeah, yeah.
So what I understand is that we need to plug it with the products that we are selling, right? And then
Yeah.
based on that, we do the okay. And do we combine somehow probability and category?
I do well, yeah. So, like for SMB and lower mid market, I have a probability by stage, by
Mm-hmm.
opportunity type. So, opportunity type being new versus upgrade,
Mm-hmm.
because those are quite different. And then the same thing I map based on those historical conversion rates. Um, on the forecast category side, pipeline, best case commit, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to map those to probabilities,
Okay.
again, based on historical trends with adjustment if needed.
And is there some kind of playbook that sales reps should get on the AE on how to put these categories, or
Yeah,
how this,
absolutely. Yeah,
because I
yeah, for
think this is the
sure.
biggest challenge.
Yeah, well, the most disciplined companies, well, I think, I mean, every company should be doing this, but like, what are the gradations? Everyone should have clear definitions in a playbook for what stages mean. Everyone should have clear definitions in a playbook for what forecast categories mean. And those definitions are not like just based on, in fact, I wouldn't even necessarily even mention the probabilities. I think it's more about the exit criteria and
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
requirements. So, by way of example, like in 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 an extreme, okay, so one of our portfolio companies, they joke that the bottom 450 of the Fortune 500 are the small guys. So they're selling to jumbo accounts to jumbo deals to jumbo accounts, and we have a handful of portfolio companies like that. And with those folks, um, this is more in the extreme, right? But not only do they have their sales process outlined, like, and sales process should include exit criteria. They also have said, we know in these deals, these are 18-month plus sales cycles for new logo
Mm-hmm.
lands, and you're doing a $10 million deal, and they know that there are these five. Bringing this back to the buying committee thing, we know that there are these five personas that are key to the deal. And so what they've gone so far as to do is they've basically said, okay, at every stage of the sales process, we have a certain expectation of exit criteria for each one of those five roles. And um, they not sort of they tied those to medic, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
do double click on the medic sales and deal health methodology. So, in that case, they've got it very, very deeply outlined. And like, yes, it's not perfectly linear, and some people accomplish certain exit criteria at different times. So you have to have the flexibility in the way you project manage the opportunity. But that and I just use a very specific language that doesn't those words don't often go together, which is like truly project managing an opportunity. So in the extreme, right, you're gonna have to do that, and it ties back to the buying committee, that if you know your buying committees are getting bigger and you need to persuade um, more people, then you you
Mm-hmm.
need you need discipline around that.
Yeah. So okay, we before we even clean the deals and we have all this, let's talk a bit about, because I think forecasting is also with the pipeline that we generate,
Hmm.
right? Because if demand is not doing their job, then what are we forecasting? Uh, or
Yeah.
what are we pushing in the deals? So how do you see it? Like, is it nowadays better to look at the tactical side of the demand and see what we can bring in the pipeline, or it should be still a discussion with the the board, and these are the numbers that we changed and these are the numbers that we need to deliver?
Oh,
What's your
setting
take
a
on that?
setting a top down target versus
Yeah, like yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
versus being realistic, I guess, about
Or I
uh,
don't know, having
yeah.
the looking at the tacticians and looking at, okay, what can we actually
Yeah,
um
well, this
build.
negotiation has been around my whole career, but
I know.
of the board or the CFO or CEO, whatever, saying, "Hey, this is the number we're going to hit. Let's figure out how to get there." So, yeah, I think this is an adjustment from the growth at all costs to efficient growth, which is, in the growth at all costs world, literally you would just say, "Hey, we're going to go from 20 million. We want to go from 20 million to 40 million ARR." And let's put together the financial plan to achieve that with reasonable assumptions.
Yeah.
So that's absolutely in phases of my career, that was part of my job, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
okay, we need to hire this many AEs, we need to spend this much on marketing, we need to do, XYZ to pricing and packaging, right? We're like mapping out the strategic levers that are going to get us from 20 to 40 million, and also being realistic about ramp rates and when people are hired. So anyway, that was like the old way. I think the new, so it was way more top down historically, and I do think to your what you're implying, the bottom up has become much bigger factor. So I think, you know it's not so much we want to go from 20 to 40. It's like, okay, we want to achieve, we're at a rule of, right? People talk about rule of 40. That's 40% if you add together your ARR growth and your EBITDA margin. So a growth and efficiency measure. So they might, maybe the company is at rule of 10, right? And they say, look, we want to get to rule of 20. So I think you
Mm-hmm.
have this additional constraint now, which is we're not just modeling, um, how do we get to 20 to 40 million? We're actually saying we're at 20 million. We want to grow by something, by the most we can, and go from rule of 10 to rule of 20.
Mm-hmm.
So in that particular instance, the basically like the demand side becomes incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
And I will still say I'm not seeing a ton of models yet that companies are using where they are looking at their, for example, their marketing spend
Mm-hmm.
and saying like, here's the marginal contribution of the incremental dollar of marketing on
Mm-hmm.
revenue. I'm not seeing that yet so much. It's always been there in like very inbound driven businesses like PLG businesses and folks who sell
Yeah, because you
more
can measure it, right? Like you
because you
can
can
track
measure
it
it.
easier, much like super easy
Yeah, but
compared
not in,
to
yeah,
dark social or whatever B2B non-linear journeys,
yeah,
right?
you can't, it's really hard to do
Mm-hmm.
in like mid-market and enterprise selling. It's just they're just not tightly enough coupled. So there's
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of um, a little bit more art to
Yeah. So
forecasting in that
so
world.
if we are going into bottom up, what's that discussion that those marketeers should have with the CFO with RevOps? Because what I feel is there is not enough CAC payback discussion, basically.
Yeah, well, there is now
There
increasingly,
is
but
now, but
yeah,
yeah.
I, it's another like best practice companies. What do? Well, they say, okay, we're going to go from 20 to 30 million. All right, I've lowered the
Hmm.
target from 40, so we're going to go from 20 to 30 million, and then you're going to say like at least at to some, we have to be very careful about attribution because it's murky and often a fool's errand to try to figure it out completely. But at the very least, you might be able to say, okay, we expect marketing to contribute X, we expect sales to contribute Y, we expect partners contribute Z. Um, whatever, we have a PLG channel that'll contribute whatever amount. So I think for people to basically sign up for a certain amount of contribution, I think is key. And then there's the very realistic conversation about um, which channels are actually converting. I'm a big fan. In addition to your podcast, I'm a big fan of a bunch of other podcasts. One of them is Chris Walker's
Yeah.
podcast, and what he's because I think he's very much at the forefront of the discussion of like really take a close look at your paid, really take a close look at your like there's paid branded and unbranded.
Mm.
Look at your paid social, look at your event marketing, whether those are, I think he's super anti big trade show
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
marketing and like very pro intimate event. So like last night, the thing I was at was an intimate event with customers and prospects of a of a SaaS company, and they hired out an event space. They got a Michelin star chef to prepare a meal for 20
Mm-hmm.
people, and we all got to talk shop for that period of time in a comfortable, unstructured, peer environment. Like, I think that's the kind of marketing that is way more effective,
Mm-hmm.
versus like funding a booth at a trade show. So yeah, I think there is this much tighter inspection of that. But yeah, in the forecasting context, I think if you want to have a budget of X millions of dollars for trade shows, then you got to commit either at the trade show level, which is hard, or just to say marketing is going to contribute X, and give the trust the CMO with the discretion to optimize their spend across their portfolio.
I think one comment on that before, because I know we have 5 more minutes and I want to pick your brain on talent. But one comment that on ABM and attribution. Actually, it was in Exit 5 podcast with I think it was ABM manager CMO of Snowflake, and the question was like how you attribute an influence to a deal from your ABM campaigns, right? And the lady from Snowflake said, I just look if from all my targeted accounts if we close a deal or not. It's like that simple as that. And this
Yeah.
is why ABM, there is a beauty there, right? Because you have targeted accounts, it's not just random demand, right?
Yes. Yes.
And then you just need to create brand campaigns and thought leadership campaigns and so on. And in the end, because it's not a linear journey, if you close those accounts, now the question is, do you have enough time to actually um, do all those programs and all those campaign? Will the CFO have the patience to see that CAC payback, I don't know, 1 or 2 years from now, and then say,
Yep.
hey, I told you, here is the targeted account? That's a different discussion, right? But going to talent, what I see is that if we go bottom up forecasting, we are changing maybe the tactics. We don't need that many AEs, as you also mentioned. We need to change people, right? Like, it's hard, but we need to either lay off or upskill or change the competencies, because there are different competencies needed in a new GTM, right? So, what's your take on that? How do we approach the people side of this whole change of both forecasting and the GTM changing?
Ah, that was probably more than the 2 or 3 minute
I
conversation
know, I know, I know.
that we have left. So maybe we do a second episode just on talent, because I do geek out. If I had another
Sure.
career in me, I probably would actually go into like people analytics, because I love the domain. Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit already about just kind of right sizing capacity to demand. That's definitely a trend that's happening right now. And I think the other piece, yeah, is I know you mentioned my 16 years at Gartner. Like, I know from personal experience that the longer you stay somewhere, like, just the more expert you become, obviously. But
Yeah.
I've done studies in companies I've been at of like, what is the quota attainment of reps over time? And the general bucket is basically like, there's a ramp in productivity from an aggressive ramp, fast ramp in productivity from year 0 to 1. There continues to be like a slower ramp in year 2. And then once a rep is in for 2+ years, like, they are up and down, whatever, but they're pretty much ramped. And because now they know the processes, they know how to get deals done, they know the value proposition, they've also accumulated a ton of stories of use cases and people that they've
Mm-hmm.
worked with, and that storytelling, I think, is so critical to being an effective seller. So yeah, I mean, in general, and like no one wants to lay people off. I mean, but in general, I would really strive to, easy to say now, but hire to meet demand, and then really invest in those people, to make sure that they're they're around for 2+ years. Because if you're churning people out in under 2 years, like you want to talk about an efficiency, maybe it's a good place to bring this all together and wrap it, is like the hidden cost of employee churn is enormous. So both from an opportunity cost of lost productivity, but also in like the direct cost of hiring and recruiting and ramping
Mm,
people. So it oddly, then no one, I don't think, I have not really heard a lot of people talk about this. It's like one of the best levers to be an efficient grower is actually to retain your talent.
yeah.
So that's one I think that's under invested in.
Yeah, I come from corporate world and I worked in learning and development for a few corporations, and I remember that one of the biggest exercises that we were doing each year was a competency map. So we were really performance appraisal plus competency map. I know it's a very corporate thing, but in organizations it can really help you understand, okay, with the new strategy, what are the skills that are needed, what skills and competencies do my people have, and where do I need to upscale, right? Because it's much easier, much cheaper to upscale and train
Yeah.
than hire. Imagine organizational culture, processes, understanding the relationships within the organizations, the cost. But and I'm talking only internal, not even external, like
Yeah.
talking to the customer. That's a different
Absolutely.
dinosaur. So um, definitely, if you can afford it, yeah, hire well, but also map these
Retain.
competencies, what you need now, then try to upscale.
Yeah.
Jeremy, it was amazing. Thanks a lot for this. For sure, we need to continue because I see we have a common passion, which is talent, and we can discuss more about that in today's economical environment and how we link it to RevOps and so on. But thanks for today. I know that you need to go, so guys, thanks for tuning in. Jeremy, LinkedIn, right? Like you're a top voice. That's the best place to reach you.
That is
Any
the best
books or
place.
resources to recommend before we go?
I think, yeah, just LinkedIn, and is where I put most stuff. I also have something called revenue-playbook.com, or you go to insightpartners.com. We have a lot of content as well, so
Cool,
lots of resources out there for folks.
cool. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. Have a nice
Thank
day.
you, Romeo.
Cheers. Bye, guys.